Hello and welcome back to the Q&A. So as always, if you've got questions, you can leave them down in the comments of this video. I've already got loads of lore questions backed up, so by all means still leave them, but if you've got any questions that are about like game design and maybe just various, garrisons, systems in the game, daily quests, etc, then be sure to leave them down in the comments. Anyway, time to get on to today's questions. So first of all, I've got one from James Oakley who said, "What do you think about Garrisons not being in future expansions? It seems like a bit of a waste of resources." Well, I think it's actually good that the Garrisons themselves in their current incarnation are not going to be in the future expansions, but I don't think there's going to be a waste of resources. It'll take a minute to explain. So first of all, the Garrisons right now feel like a very Warlords of Draenor thing in terms of just their design and a lot of the stuff that's going on with them. I think it would be a bit, it's just not really that interesting if our garrison magically got teleported onto Azeroth and all of a sudden just popped out of nowhere. I just don't think that would be particularly interesting, and plus, sometimes it's nice with a new expansion to be turning over a new leaf and really getting a system that at least feels new. If it was just, oh hey, here's your garrison again, well, I don't really think that would feel particularly new to players, and that's a really important aspect of a new expansion. But on to the topic of it being not having garrisons being a waste of resources. Well, I don't think that will happen. When they made the garrisons, well, Blizzard really, I think, made a lot of internal systems and underlying things that we don't really see. Ultimately, the garrison that we actually see as players is really just the front dressing for a whole bunch of systems. So I'd imagine, for your character, you've probably got some sort of table with a whole bunch of values in it, or, in a database, and based what's on that, that's what the game draws for your garrison, and, it's like the fundamental guts of the garrison are what's important, not the actual visuals of the garrison. Don't let the art team know I said that, because I know they spent a crazy amount of time working on it. But in future expansions, a lot of the underlying systems and technology can be reused. For an example, take work orders. Well, if they need to do a work order with whatever they do in the next expansion, the code is already there, it's already done and implemented. If they need a building system or a plot system, again, that's already done. Their whole thing with followers and missions, that's all coded. They can make a new version of that fits the theme of another expansion better. So really just being able to take all that technology, then have a new expansion and sort of turn over a fresh leaf with the system, I think could be a very, very good thing. Now, do I think they will bring over the garrison or something like it? Absolutely. Now that I've played Warlords of Draenor for over a month, the garrison is definitely an integral part of how the game's going, and if I think back to past expansions, well, I was doing dailies, and that was, I was doing dailies, the odd dungeon, and it just seems like what the garrison's done is added more. I think what they should do in a future expansion, though, is have a garrison-like system, but also have a lot of other stuff in the world. Right now, I think that we are a little bit too centralized in the garrison, and I think that its overall role in the expansion is a little bit too great for, it's too large in comparison to how good I think the system is. So perhaps I'd hope that in the next expansion they maybe just keep it going with the garrison system, do a nice new shiny version, but then because they don't have to spend all that time developing that underlying tech, then they could go and make some cool reps, or just, some other things in the world that we could do that are just not tied into the garrison. It's certainly an interesting feature, and I think that the good points of it will be carried forward into future expansions, and I think any of the things or parts of the garrison that perhaps overstep their bound might be toned down a little bit, or perhaps tweaked, so that they're just a bit less disruptive on the game. It's certainly been an interesting experiment, and I suppose we'll just have to wait and see as to what they actually add in the patches. I think a lot of my current problems with the garrison could be at least tweaked with patches. However, even with that, I still think perhaps the world would be a little bit too centralized in the garrison for my liking. Really, when it comes to Draenor, I think I'm looking forward to the patch that takes us away from the garrison, so the Isle of Thunder style patch, or the Timeless Isle style patch that takes us away to an island or a new zone or something like that. That's cool. I really hope that Farallon patch comes to pass, though. I'd be very sad if they did go through with the sort of rough idea of maybe scrapping it that they've kind of talked about. Anyway, time to move on to another question from Time Kaiser, who said, "Do I think they'll ever update the Blood Elf and Draenei starter zones to reflect what's happened so far in the lore? It seems a bit odd for new monk characters to be experiencing all the events of those specific TBC questlines." Okay, so I think that's a good question, and a lot of it does make sense. Yeah, there are some time-related problems. However, ultimately, I wouldn't change them. I think both of the zones do serve their purpose pretty well. I think, well, I know that at least the Draenei one could do with a little bit less running around the place, but still, I think they're quite fun. And I like how the Draenei stuff kind of ties into what happens in Blood Mist Isle. And the same goes for the Blood Elves, actually, because, of course, after you're done in Eversong Forest, you move on to the Ghostlands. And that stuff's just, it flows really well, it's really cool, and I think it's decent content. I wouldn't change it at all. The storylines themselves, I think, just stand out on their own, and they don't really... I don't think they really need a massive amount of context as to the other parts of the Burning Crusade. Like, you start off in the Blood Elf one, you see all the stuff that's going on, you see the mana, the mana, like, starved people doing their thing, and the same goes, you know, for the story that's going on with the Draenei. You don't really need to know what happened in the future or the past. All you know is the Exodar has just crashed, there's a bunch of problems, and now you need to go and help your people. I think they just, on a standalone basis, work really well. And yeah, I guess it is a little bit strange for a new monk, but again, I just don't think that's a massive issue, and honestly, I think the development time is better spent working on new expansion content. With that covered, let's move on to a question from Ensar Akinci, who said, "What is your favourite Warlords of Draenor zone, and why?" A very good question, and a bit of a fluffy answer. I like all of them, but I think my favourite ones would have to be Shadowmoon Valley, and at least from what I played of it in the beta, Frostfire Ridge, basically the two starter zones. I think that Frostfire is one of the most visually striking zones they've ever made. I generally love sort of northern style places, that's why I liked so much of Northrend, and just the whole thing of, you know, the lava and the glacier stuff. I just think it's so damn cool looking, and I also think that it's got the best music of any zone. I absolutely love what's going on in Frostfire Ridge. As far as the story goes, well, I've played everything up to the Battle of Thunder Pass in the beta, and I did enjoy the story. However, I think that Shadowmoon Valley does have a little bit of a stronger story. And as for Shadowmoon Valley, well, again, I think it's really visually striking. I think it's got a wonderful story and some great music, and it just feels really well complete and polished. Now, moving on to Gorgrond, well, I think Gorgrond is okay. It's not amazing, it's just, I don't know, it works, it's a very good quality zone. It's not that I dislike it at all. I mean, it's still in the sort of range of things that I like, so that's what's going on with Gorgrond. As for Talador, well, there's something about the flow of Talador which I don't really like, but I do like the aesthetic of the zone. It's really cool seeing Shattrath City. I like its music, and the dual stories that go on with the Battle of Shattrath City, and then, of course, moving on to the Auchindoun stuff is really fun. So it's definitely a zone that I like, it just doesn't take the top spot, because just parts of it don't feel as polished as they could be. A few of the quests are a little bit annoying, and I think some of the stuff in Auchindoun is... I don't know what it is. There's something about it. Like, I really enjoyed the story there, but I didn't enjoy the actual gameplay experience for some reason. At least for some of the quests. I mean, they're fun initially, but for some reason they just wore off for me. Now, moving on to the Spires of Iraq, I think that visually it's a really cool zone, and it maybe doesn't appeal to me enough for it to topple Frostfire Shadowmoon, though. It's also got some really cool music. But story-wise, like, I think the stuff with the Arakoa is really cool, but it doesn't have a cinematic, and I don't know, it's good, it's great, it's a really fun zone, it just can't take the top spot for me. And then I think moving on to Nagrand, well, Nagrand is, it's good, right? Like, I think the questing there was okay, I suppose. I don't think it was particularly good, and frankly, it doesn't feel like the end of the Warlords of Draenor questing experience. I'm pretty sure that, you know, the whole decision to cut Tanan Jungle really just sort of nipped the bud of the Warlords of Draenor story that we should have had when we were questing. And the fall of Garrosh at the end is fine. It feels like something that should happen during the Warlords of Draenor leveling, but it doesn't feel like the very final bit of the leveling. I mean, surely we should have some sort of epic culmination with the Iron Horde themselves, rather than, oh, storm in, kill Garrosh, let Thrall do his thing, and away we go. I just thought that was kind of meh, unbelievably meh. And even though the stuff with Nabundu up at the Throne of Elements was fun, Nagrand just didn't really work for me, and I think from a visual perspective as well, Nagrand's original thing that made it so awesome was the floating islands and how that tied in with the really cool music and the primal feel. Without the islands being like that, it's kind of lost a little bit of its touch, really, and it's not that it's my least favourite zone in Draenor, it definitely isn't, I do enjoy it, but it doesn't live up to its namesake, and I think that's nearly something that was going to happen anyway because of a mix of expectations, and then also the fact that broken Nagrand is kind of what made Nagrand cool. One thing though, on the musical front for Nagrand is I think like, I enjoy Nagrand more when the original music is playing, and I know part of that's nostalgia, but I also think that music is far more immersive than a lot of the music that they have going on in regular Nagrand. So that's what's going on there. Overall, yeah, Frostfire Ridge and Shadowmoon Valley are my favourites. Then finally, Krama asked me a question about what I think of the Arakoa. So I think they're really cool, actually. It's one of the more interesting races they've got going on in the game. I think it's really unfortunate that the rep is not fun at all to grind up, but that's besides the point. The story's really interesting. I think it's quite well told. Maybe there could be a little bit more voice acting to contextualize the actual quests that you do, because it's definitely one of those quest lines where I think you do need to read the quest text to fully get it. But with all that stuff said, I still think that it's one of the most interesting little bits of side lore that they've got going on in Warlords of Draenor, and I'm very glad that they've decided to keep them in there. Plus, it's really cool working for the Arakoa faction that we, in the Burning Crusade, ended up fighting. I just think that was a very cool little thing that they did. And the standing up winged Arakoa that can fly around the place look really, really badass. And I hope that we've got some way of fighting them in like a future patch. I don't know, maybe one of the bosses of some raid could be an Arakoa dude, or there could be something going on there. That said, I don't know how much they've kind of tied up that lore, so hard to know. Anyway, overall though, to answer your question, I think the Arakoa are really darn cool, and I'm glad that they're here. So that's really it for today's Q&A. If you've got any questions specifically related to game mechanics and systems, be sure to leave them there, and then of course any other topics are also very welcome. Thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.